Have we been teaching modern women the wrong things? You know, what should be valued in society now, and men for that matter. This clip here, they go into some detail about how women are suffering and how men are also affected and suffering by this.
What do you, as a woman who is successful and has a PhD and all the rest of it, what do you see in the future as a potentially useful way to frame this, not whether it be conversation with the public or potential policy implications or just like cultural interventions and technologies like mimetic interventions that we can do to try and make this easier? Because it sucks for women that, given the fact they've only just reached educational and employment parity, that they're now basically facing a world where for every pound extra that they earn, their dating prospects get worse. And for every degree that they get, they're finding it harder to get married. And also men being forgotten and forlorn and retreating into porn and video games at rates greater than ever before. That if one sex loses, both sexes lose, right? And as far as I can see, sexlessness is increasing amongst men. I'm sure you've seen the stats about tripled since 2008 to 2018, blah, blah. It's not good for anybody at the moment, right? And yet, saying, women, have you considered being a little bit less educated or economically independent? It'll make your dating prospects better. Not a campaign that is going to be particularly successful for any politician to run on.
Right.
That's how you get killed, right there. Women, why don't you guys just settle down, you know? Why don't you get back in the kitchen, you know, put on your slippers, your bathrobes, you know, a little soap opera, make your man a meal, bring him his beer. You know, you'd be so much happier.
You must have considered this. You must have considered this current sort of cultural challenge that we face, given the ground truth of hypergamy. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I think I tend to be a little less worried about the future, in all honesty. I don't doubt those statistics that you've said, but I think that, you know, my understanding of the way that these dynamics play out is it's always an arms race, right? So each sex is kind of competing to do the best that they can in the environment that they are in. And we're very plastic, you know, we're very phenotypically plastic. We respond, we alter our behavior to suit our environment, we adapt. And there are some big questions about how fast we adapt, but I think in a lot of these kinds of, in this particular discussion, I think that people are just going to find a way. You know, that pressure to mate is such a strong one. I think people are going to find a way to do it.
She says people are going to find a way to do it, but what I'm thinking about what she's saying is that doesn't mean they're getting married. That doesn't mean they're having a stable relationship. That means they're going to go and have sex and maybe get pregnant and have a child. And we're just going to have a bunch of single mothers and single fathers and that kind of garbage. Like, that is not ideal. You want a stable relationship. So I'm not, when she says she's optimistic about it, sure, she's optimistic about people want to get busy and they're going to do that, but are they actually going to have good, stable relationships and make and give their children the best opportunity, which is growing up with two parents who look after you and you get the best of both worlds, the father and the mother? I just feel like that's something that's missing from what she just said.
That pressure to mate is such a strong one. I think people are going to find a way to do it. Now, you know, what I've often said to women when I talk to women in this position, and it usually tends to be women who are a little more educated, who are then shocked that they're at a disadvantage, right? They're like, well, that was my experience, but everybody just told me that I was making things up or that I was just not seeing the people that are available. And I'm like, well, no, you are statistically at a disadvantage. So the one thing is I think hypergamy may relax to some extent, and it tends to have done so in terms of education. So what you are finding is that as women are getting more educated, their preferences for men who are more educated than themselves have started to relax. The income one is still a strong one.
Okay, I'm curious where she got that from, because generally when I talked, like in my dating experience, obviously it's just me, but any woman who has a lot of education, they generally want somebody who has a lot of education as well, because they'll say things like, well, I just won't be able to connect, with that other person, like, what will we talk about? Like, they're a plumber, I'm a accountant with a master's in blah, I don't know. There's an idea that because somebody might not have the same amount of education as you, you're not going to have as much to talk about, and you're not going to be able to relate beyond the fact of how much money they might make, because generally if you have more education you make more money. Not always true, as we know. Like, a lot of people have started businesses and are now billionaires, and they dropped out of university. So,
But it's hard to test the strengths for that whilst we still have gender inequality in income, right? Because whilst there is gender inequality in income, there is always going to be an incentive, if you're a woman, to pair with a man who is richer than you. That incentive will always exist. So I think that we're going to continue to see that degree of hypergamy in terms of income continue.
So I realized while I was editing this video that I didn't actually address the point that she talked about gender inequality, and if it is to continue, meaning that she believes that it is currently happening, then we're going to have the issues that she's referring to in the video. Why wouldn't a woman want to chase a man who makes more money? And she doesn't really address at all in this video what she means by gender inequality in income, because I would say if you have two, I don't know, doctors, they're both general practitioners, they both graduated at the same time, they both had basically the same sort of marks and scores in university and medical school, etc., and they're of equal skill, then they should kind of be paid the same, right? Now, we have this thing in our society where you're able to negotiate, and if you're better at negotiating, you can get more money. I mean, that's something that I continuously do in my life whenever I go to new jobs or contracts, is trying to negotiate a higher rate. So when I hear this, if somebody goes into an interview and doesn't negotiate at all, and the other person does, and that other person gets $5,000 more a year or $2,000 a year or whatever it is, then they deserve that because they put effort and skill and whatever into negotiating. And if I remember correctly, at least Jordan Peterson has talked about this, that women are less likely to negotiate because of, I guess it's more of a typically male trait to be a little bit more disagreeable and to try to negotiate for more money. I guess accepting the offer as presented to you is more of a agreeable trait. I mean, I don't know how you would ever get rid of that other than not allowing people to negotiate and like make a case for why they should be paid more. So you would just have to put like job postings up. If it's $60,000 a year, it's $60,000 a year. But I don't think there is very much income inequality that I would really call an issue. I mean, I think there is some because women tend to pick different jobs. But if you look at the same job and a woman versus a man, and they have the same experience and all of that, I think to be pretty close.
Now, for men, and particularly for these poorer men who are in this worst prospect, it's a really tough one, right? I making that kind of argument of, well, we should try and have women be less educated is just not going to work, right? And
no, nobody can do that. You can't do that. That's stupid. Like, no one's going to sign on board with that. We're not going to the Taliban and be like, okay, guys, we're going into Sharia law now. Women are not allowed to be educated. No, I think women should be educated. We have so much more brain power and technology and workforce, to get things done now that we have women who are also in the work world. So I think it's very positive. Plus, I think there's something to be said if your mother is quite educated, she'll probably do a pretty good job at educating her kids. So even if you went and you got a master's and you got a PhD or whatever it is, and you really didn't use it too much, I think just the fact that you're the mom, right? You will have that education, that understanding how to think, because that's what university teaches you, how to think, or supposed to. So you would be able to kind of impart it onto your children. So even if you don't use it in a work-related activity, it would help with the children.
And particularly doing it in a way that you seem resentful and aggressive and anti-woman is not going to appeal to any women that you might want to attract. But at the same time, to then ignore this group of men and say, oh, well, you should just toughen up and don't complain about it is absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Sure, it's the wrong thing to do, but that's what society does continuously. So, I mean, that's just how we treat men. Like, toughen up, you little bitch. Basically it.
And one of the things that we have kind of advocated for and tried to speak about is that we need to find a way to support these young men without just telling them that what they're seeing in the market is inaccurate, or that because men in general tend to receive lots of benefits, that their gripes and their issues are something that we should ignore. How we do that in reality is a tricky question. One, this is a bit of an indirect approach, income inequality is something we consistently come back to being a problem. One is we could try and challenge income inequality. I authentically think that would make a really big difference, particularly amongst men's competition with other men, and that would help these worse off individuals. Another indirect kind of pathway is, maybe we work with those men to give them something else that they can offer to a romantic relationship that's not as important as income. Maybe we train them in being excellent parents. I mean, I know that seems like a bit of an odd thing to say, but, if women are looking for, at a population level, taking care of their resources, right, and then wanting to be able to pair with someone who can be a good parent, if these men are really finding it difficult to handle that resource issue because they're disadvantaged in particular ways, or maybe they just don't have interests to go and be a stockbroker. They just want to do something else, which is completely legitimate. Maybe we find them a way that they can advertise their prowess as parents, and we can invest in that way. I mean, these are some potential things.
Absolutely. I mean, I've played with a bunch of these solutions. I'm trying to come up with them. Pedestalizing motherhood and fatherhood is definitely one of them, because it steps outside of this existing sort of hypergamous relationship and takes us into this sort of more familial thing, a familial setting in which characteristics like kindness, attentiveness, humor, goodwill, grit, determination, conscientiousness, that's not being driven toward a capitalist end. All of those are able to come out, right, in a really good way. However, it is currently very low status to be a stay-at-home dad. I mean, it's not exactly pedestalized to be a stay-at-home mum, but it's definitely not pedestalized to be a stay-at-home dad. So I think that may be a little bit of an uphill battle, although it's not something that I would be like too averse to seeing. Totally right. Trying to claw back women's recently achieved parity in education and employment is not even going to begin getting anywhere.
Now, that's crazy to me that there's so many men who are sexless. I've also heard stats that more women say they're in relationships than percentage-wise, and less men say they're in relationships percentage-wise, which doesn't really make sense. So it's almost like women are saying they're in relationships with the same men, or the man just thinks they're like having a fling or whatever, and the woman thinks they're in a relationship. Here they talked a lot about income and how women making more, and then they want generally somebody who makes more or higher or as equally as educated. I'll be interested to see how this all plays out. We're living in an experiment right now. We are literally living in an experiment. I mean, I guess we'll see in 20 years, right? Just what becomes of that, because this is pretty ridiculous. Okay, thanks guys. If you found this video valuable, please give it a like and a subscribe. I am going to be doing some other parts of this podcast. I'm going to cut it up and make multiple shorter videos. So please look for those in the coming days.